Welcome to the Nursing Post podcast, where it's all nursing all the time with Ashley and Rosa. This podcast is meant to be informative and to help spark conversation. Well, today we're going to hit, I think, a nerve for a lot of nurses. We're going to start with the RaDonda Vaught sentencing that just took place last week on Friday the 13th. And no matter what the outcome, this case I think has changed and will change nursing forever. Once we finish up the RaDonda case and our thoughts on that, we're going to shift a little bit to another case that's been in the news as well. And that's going to be the trial with Dr. William Husel. And just a quick recap, I know we haven't talked about that case on our podcast, but he was on trial for murder of 14 patients by ordering excessive doses of fentanyl. And I'm not talking just a little bit more fentanyl. We're looking at 10 to 20 times the normal dose that he was ordering for patients who he was trying to provide what he called comfort care to. This was originally 25 counts, but the trial was only for 14. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's a lot of opinions to go around in nursing when it comes to, or in medicine, period, when it comes to both of these. And so we'll just hit quick on the RaDonda trial before we jump into William Husel's trial and how that ended up as well.
Absolutely. So as Ashley had mentioned, on Friday the 13th, which was last week, RaDonda's verdict and sentencing had come down. It was bittersweet. It was for nursing the best that we could hope for the situation that we were given.
Absolutely.
Because there's two courts, right? The real court, federal, and then the court of public opinion. And I think nurses felt like this should have never even been taken to court. So with that being said, the total minimum amount of years that she was facing, in prison was the bare minimum of 5.
Right.
The Tennessee judge gave her leniency, and what she basically did was divert her jail sentence and give her 3 years of probation. And as long as she, quote unquote, kept her nose clean and stayed out of trouble, they're going to possibly expunge her record.
Right.
So the reason she was given leniency, the family never wanted her to go to jail.
No.
We have to remember first and foremost that the victim here is Charlene Murphy, and she cannot be forgotten throughout this RaDonda Vaught trial. And the family has forgiven RaDonda, so they asked for leniency.
Right.
And they did that because they said they just didn't want RaDonda to make another mistake that could potentially cost somebody else their life. They realized it was a mistake, that she had no intent in harming Charlene. So they weren't looking to throw the book at her.
Right.
And then the second part of this, I think the judge realized what kind of standard that this would set going forward, as much so to the fact that she mentioned it during the sentencing portion of the trial, of the sentencing. And she felt that if the sentence was harsh and prison time was given, I feel this is how I perceived it, she felt that it would overthrow the healthcare system. And I think it would. That's just my personal opinion. But she also was very direct, and she said, RaDonda owned it. She never hid. She never, tried to cover it up. She never blamed it on somebody else. She took full accountability and honesty of her medication error. And she expressed remorse from the time of the realization to the time where she was standing in front of the judge for her sentencing. And so that's why she ended up with the 3 years probation, jail diversion, with the possibility of being expunged. There are a lot of people, both I call civilian and medical professionals,
Right.
that just feel a certain type of way about this. Like there is like no right to wrong here, and everybody has an opinion.
Well, not only that, it's the whole trial itself. I think when you have any particular person who admits to an accident, and I don't mean that there shouldn't be consequences if there is an accident. I want to be clear with that. There was a consequence. She has to, or would have, fought for her license and her ability, her livelihood, her years of college, all would have went down the drain with this, or could have went. You know, when you make a mistake and you have to answer to a medical board, no matter what your licensure is or what you hold, you have to be accountable to something. And when you take somebody's mistake and criminalize it when they've done nothing but be cooperative and try to help and admit their mistake, then you're literally undoing the foundation of nursing.
So this is my thought process. I think, you know how there's military life. I grew up in a military family. So there's military life and then there's civilian life.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two different codes of conduct. You know, even the military has its own, you know, NCIS or, you know, investigative, you know, portion of its branches.
Right.
Because the language and the culture in the military is just so different from that in civilian life. And in my opinion, when I sit back and think, I think this is also that same issue. I feel like healthcare is a whole different systems of codes, conducts, and ethics, and they're trying to squeeze those codes and standards and conducts into civilian law when they don't even understand the medical world.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. And we know that because we take ethics and moral classes, you know, in healthcare. And we are told, like, I remember specifically being told that you are held to a higher standard because of your nursing licensure. And that was, to me, as an LPN student. So I could only imagine, you know, with the additional years of education that other nurses may have, that they probably hear that even more so.
Absolutely.
Just because they're in longer. So they're hearing, you know, and we're constantly hearing you're held to a higher standard. There's certain things you can and can't do. Like there's things that we can do outside of work that could jeopardize our licensure, our nursing license.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody has that problem. Like
well,
if you're
like
business,
I said,
if you have your master's in business, you know, and you go out here and get an assault charge, like that company might care, but nobody's going to take away your degree. Well, that absolutely can happen where if you get an assault charge, you may have to answer to the board of nursing and you very well could get your licensure revoked.
Exactly. And ultimately, not only does RaDonda have to live with the fact, you know, that she made this med error that caused somebody's death, she has to live with that every day. And I don't know if anybody watched any of the trial, but you could see that she's extremely distraught and upset about this, but she'll never be able to practice as a nurse ever again in her lifetime due to her convictions. So
well, I think that what's irritating is everybody in the nursing field knows that med errors happen. And if you haven't made a med error, either you're a baby nurse, you didn't know it, or you're lying.
Or you just haven't done one yet. But
That's what I'm
I'm
saying, like a
telling
baby
you,
nurse, like it's
every
gonna
nurse,
happen.
well, you could be
Right.
like 25 years in and tomorrow might be your day.
Right.
So you see what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
just it hasn't happened to you yet, but I trust me, if anybody goes 30, 20, 15, 10 years and say, oh, I've never had an error, I'm calling bullshit.
I would agree.
I'm calling bullshit.
There are what, hundreds of thousands of med errors every year worldwide.
Absolutely. We just talked about it. Our last 2 episodes
Right. Like it
were
was like
about this.
the third leading cause of death in you know, in the world, or
Yes.
some type of medical error. So we don't need to go backwards. The only way to fix these problems is to move forward, and for people to own and be upfront and honest about reporting these things. So I'm hoping that because she was given leniency, people will be like, okay, this judge understood the implications that were going to happen within healthcare. But I don't think we can't put Pandora back in the box.
No, it's open. And this does set a standard going forward. You know, it's funny because if you've ever been to court or had a friend go to court or know people that are lawyers or judges, they will tell you, you know, this, you can have a good day or a bad day any day that you're in court. If
Yeah.
that judge has a wild hair, then, you know, everybody's getting tickets and fines.
Right.
So
Right.
you just never know which way it's going to go. So I think the moral of this story is like what we had been saying in the last 2 episodes. CYA,
Yes.
say no. And that's
Yep.
more than to drugs. That's to unstaffed, you know, unsafe staffing ratios, assignments, working over 16 hours, working over 12 hours, you know, and they'll try to throw any and everything at you. Like, oh, I'm going to report you to the Board of Nursing because, you know, you're walking off your abandonment of shift situation. You know, they will do any and everything. So my advice is to, before you accept any type of assignment, is to make sure you do your research. Make sure that you're not the one nurse taking care of 60 people in a SNF unit or a long-term care unit. That's unsafe. So if they can't bring in somebody else to help you with at least half that load, you shouldn't accept it. And I know that that's easier said than done because I've worked those facilities before, but it's not worth losing your livelihood or the fact that you may spend some time in the clinker because you made a decision in which you knew wasn't safe, but you maybe were in fear of blowback from your job, retaliation from your job.
Well,
We're
or
nurses,
you feel
honey.
bad. You feel bad because you're like, well, if I'm not here, then they get nobody. So at least
Exactly.
something is better than
But
nothing.
if that's not your, okay. So the company's staffing issues aren't your concern. They're not your responsibility. It's the company's responsibility.
Right. They're the one getting compensated from that insurance company, and they're the ones who promised the patients that they had the staff to take care of them when they took them in. So if they
Correct.
don't have that, that's for them to produce, not for you as a nurse to try to figure out.
No, and like I said, it's all about CYA. It's about your license. It's about your safety, because if you're not safe, you can't make your patients safe. So it is okay sometimes to say no. And we're just going to go ahead and flip the coin because as Ashley mentioned, there has been a recent court case that came up where it was a physician and he was actually going to be charged with 25 counts of murder, but they had dropped it to 14. And I believe what they had concluded was it was basically physician assisted suicide.
Yeah, so this was the case of William Husel, which I mean, it made news. So a lot of people are familiar with this. And when you look at, like Rosa was saying, when you look at physician assisted suicide, there's a lot of different opinions about that. I mean, we put our animals down because we don't want to see them suffer, but then we have people suffer. So a lot of people are like, well, why is it humane to do it to your dog, but not to your grandma or whatever? So there's a lot of controversy there. Nonetheless, in 2013, researchers published a survey from 74 countries, so pretty big, and it was about pretty much opinions on physician-assisted suicide. And overall, 65% of respondents voted against it. 11 of the 74 countries, the vote was mostly for. So overall, most people said no, but there was a subgroup of 11 countries who was like, yeah, sure. In the United States, there were a little over 1,700 respondents from 49 states, and 67% voted against it. In 18 states, the majority were for physician-assisted suicide. So it's interesting because you kind of have that same theme going as it was in the world, even if you break it down further within the United States. And I will say they did not include Washington or Oregon. So their numbers were not in the mix.
I also think people need to realize, like, this wasn't even a topic until Dr. Kevorkian.
Right.
Like, this came out in the limelight with Dr. Kevorkian.
Right.
And
just to give a backstory for people who don't know who that is, Rosa, tell them real quick, like a few seconds, who he was.
So Dr. Kevorkian was a physician practicing medicine, and he did not just practice medicine on the terminally ill. He practiced, family medicine and everything else in between. So he was assisting people with their suicide. Basically, he invented this system where he would hang the vials needed in order to facilitate and help the patient. And he was using potassium chloride. I don't know if a lot of people are familiar, but if you are sentenced to death and like in the prison or jail system, like that's what they give you as your injection for your death sentence. The difference was he was setting it up, and the patients were able to actually push a button that would dispense the medications. So they would actually be doing the suicide themselves. And so a lot of people felt like that was immoral and unethical, and it did and still does, push the envelopes of medicine. It's still very taboo in a lot of places. Well, the reason, and people tried consistently. He went to court, found not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. What made him serve prison time was the fact that he had a patient with Lou Gehrig's disease. And because of the Lou Gehrig's disease, the patient himself could not facilitate the suicide. So Dr. Kevorkian was the one who assisted in that, and everything that Kevorkian did, he made sure was documented, not only on paper but in video, because he wanted people to know that he wasn't going to get somebody's talk to families, talk to patients, and they were all in accordance. This was like a group effort, not a one-man show. And because he was recorded giving this patient the injection, they convicted him of murder. And with that, he ended up going to prison, losing his license and everything else. He wasn't the only physician. There were others, other physicians and other networks, but he's the one that mainly opened up this Pandora's box that we're still trying to weed through today. And I will just say that currently, because of that and the people that came behind him, only 11 states currently legally practice physician-assisted suicide. And those states are California, Colorado, DC, Hawaii, Montana, Maine, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington State. Now, if you noticed, I did not say Ohio.
Well, why is that important?
Well, that's important because the state of Ohio decided to take William Husel to court.
Mm-hmm. And so all this started years ago, and that's pretty much what we're doing with a lot of these medical trials that we're seeing right now. Like, none of them happened recently. This is all like pre-pandemic stuff that was going on, or events that happened. We're hearing about them now because of the trials. So from 2015 to 2018, Husel and his stint at Mount Carmel healthcare systems, where he was seeing these patients and ultimately prescribed lethal doses of fentanyl. And he was fired amongst, I think it was 28 other personnel that were either put on leave or fired. I've read a couple of different things. They've all kind of said something different because I wanted to try to find some more information on the specific nurses, but nonetheless, 27 patients ended up being found to have been administered an excessive dose of fentanyl. Now, fentanyl, when I hear it, I usually think of a fentanyl patch because I'm outpatient, not inpatient. And in that instance, you usually get 25, 50, 75 micrograms of fentanyl that's on a patch that's transdermal, that is, absorbed through the skin over the course of 3 days. And then you take
22 hours.
You take that patch off and throw it away, and you put a new patch on somewhere else. And patients who have forgotten to take one patch off and it put on another patch have been hospitalized because of that, because it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
So have that in your mindset, when we're thinking 25, 50, 75. Well, Dr. Husel was prescribing doses of 1,000 micrograms up to 2,000 micrograms. And this was like IV push.
Yeah. And the funny thing, none of this is funny, but the other thing was he just wasn't pushing fentanyl alone. He had some midazolam in there. He was adding other benzos to some people. Like, he was making cocktails with and the other medications were also in excess.
Yes.
So it wasn't just the fentanyl, it was the other benzos that he was using that were in excess as well. And it was like a cocktail.
I think the thing that brought a lot of this to light was he was literally draining the ICU of their entire supply of fentanyl. And not only would he drain like the ICU that he was in, but they'd have to go to other ICUs and pull theirs because they needed so many vials to pull it up to be able to give this. And I've watched testimony on this, and it was kind of heartbreaking and sad and mind-boggling. And I don't know, I was taught that if you have to use more than 3, so 4 or more, you need a question. If you're giving 4 or more of the same pill, why at one time? So is it that the pill's not available in a higher dose because it's on back order or out of stock, and that's just, you have to do it to get to that dose? It's a normal dosing range. Or why are we using that many? Because if you're having to use that many pills to get to a certain number, usually that's a problem. That is not always the case. There are times that you're going to take more than, 3 or 4 pills, and I completely understand that. However, as a general rule of thumb, if you're pulling up, 5 vials of something, you might want to go, why do I need 5 vials? Why do I need 5 pills? Why do I need so much to make this dose? And so I was just my mind was just blown because, one of the nurses that I listened to had given actually a dose of 1,000 micrograms of fentanyl to a patient who was not responding well to morphine that she was getting Q10, that the family was asking for something stronger. She had just been extubated. And they had called in palliative care. So I was like, okay, like this patient's end of life. This is comfort measures. I completely understand that. But when they're giving this dose of medicine, the patients expire very, very quickly.
I believe in some of the testimony, they actually said, first of all, we need to clarify, these were IV pushes. These weren't, tablets. They weren't transdermal patches. These were IV pushes. So because of that, these patients were literally found expired within minutes after receiving these doses. And January of 2018, he decided he was going to give a patient 1,000 micrograms of fentanyl and 6 milligrams of midazolam IV push.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to be funny, but if people on the street are ODing because a lot of their street drugs are laced with fentanyl, can you imagine what 1,000 micrograms is going to do to any living person?
And he even prescribed up to 2,000 micrograms.
Absolutely. He's also been known to use fentanyl and hydromorphone. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Even the DEA considers 2 milligrams of fentanyl or the 2,000 micrograms to be a lethal dose. The DEA, like these are the people that are in control of like all the drugs, street drugs, medical drugs, like drugs prescribed. So they're saying
some of these nurses questioned the doses. Like some of these nurses that were on the stand said, I questioned and said, are you sure? Is this what I'm supposed to be giving? Like, not only did he get fired, but like pharmacists got fired, nurses got fired, a lot of administrators, that I will say this, at least that hospital
cleaned house. They did their job.
They were like, no, this is not okay. But, nurses lost their license over this because nurses are supposed to know better than to give medications that are at this high of a dose. Now, we are not pharmacology majors, and our pharmacology is minimal. Even if you have your master's degree in nursing, your pharmacology is minimal. A lot of your pharmacology is on the job and clinicals and doing and using these medicines. And it's amazing to me that even though they asked and were told that that was the right dose and all these things, they still had repercussions that will last them their entire life.
Well, not only that, even when he received pushback in some of the reports, he would give it to them himself. When nurses would flat out say, I'm not doing this because this will kill the patient. This patient's not on hospice or, whatever it is, know. And so he was actually, in testimony, he had actually given some of the doses himself. He mixed it up himself. He pushed it IV himself, the whole 9 yards, because some nurses, thank God, were like, I don't think so, Jack. Like, you're on your own. So he ends up getting terminated, like Ashley said, in 2018 because the hospital did their due diligence with their quality assurance. And they were like, well, why are we going through so much fentanyl? We're like in the middle of an epidemic here. Like, why are we handing this out like candy? And so he ends up being terminated. There's an investigation because, of course, not only does this trickle to, the medical board, this trickles on over to the DEA, and they get involved, and he's pleading the fifth, and he doesn't say one word because he knows that he doesn't want to self-incriminate. So on January the 25th, the state board, medical board, decided to suspend his medical license.
Yes.
So he could not practice medicine or surgery in the state of Ohio. And you have to realize that if he's not allowed to practice medicine, then he's also not allowed to write prescriptions.
Mhm.
So they go hand in hand, even though the official stamp for him not being able to write prescriptions didn't come down until like April of that same year. He ended up getting his license revoked April of 2020. And the thing that I found, like RaDonda, she was okay. She admitted it. Like if she testified and she had to testify, like we already knew because she was upfront and honest. This guy did not testify in his defense. It wouldn't have made him look good anyway. So I can understand why his lawyer would be like, hey, that's not a good deal. You already took the fifth. You might as well keep taking it. You know what I mean?
Right.
You already took it. Keep taking it. There's video evidence. There's this evidence. Just, sit back and let me do all the work. Family members testified. He had coworkers testified. You said nurses testified. Experts came into court and were saying, that he caused these patients accelerated death due to the amount of fentanyl doses that were given. So I think it came to a surprise to all of us that with 6 days of deliberation, that the jury could not reach a verdict. The judge says, you go back in there and you figure it out. And then when they come out, they find him not guilty of 14 counts of murder. My question, Ashley, is why?
Well, it's funny because I've heard some opinions on this, and, I am not a lawyer, but one of the things that I've heard is that when he decided, no, he wasn't talking to his medical board, that he didn't incriminate himself. Like he is like, nope, I'm not telling you a damn thing. I don't have to tell you a damn thing. Pretty much in his mind, his license was going to be suspended anyway, so it didn't matter what he said, it was going to have to go under review and do all this stuff. And that because he didn't give any information, they didn't have that ammunition to use against him in court. And they did do that with RaDonda because she was fully cooperative and said, oh, this is what I did, which is what I would do. It's what I think most nurses would do. They used that against her. They used her willingness against her, as to where they didn't. And so all they had to go off of were these nurses and different things like that, saying these people were in pain. They were having such a hard time. The families were asking for, more medicine to help comfort them, that they were told that that was a normal dose, that's what they gave because they asked their fellow coworkers and were advised it was fine. And when you don't know medicine, as we discussed earlier, the layperson doesn't know medicine, they're hearing there's this doctor and these nurses who are both saying that these people were in terrible pain and they're grimacing and they're restless and the family members are asking for it. So they finally give it to them and they passed away. I think in their mind, they're like, well, even if he knew it was going to happen, did he do anything bad?
Legally, I think yes, but apparently in the state of Ohio, I don't know a hell of a lot. So just like I said, with the whole RaDonda situation, and he's not the only doctor, unfortunately this happens all the time, but this is my true question. If that not guilty verdict came from lack of understanding the medical language, standards, and culture, then was he really tried by a jury of his peers? In my opinion, which is only my opinion and may not amount to much, I would have to say no. And if this is going to continue to happen and, going to set a set of standards as in RaDonda's case or this case, Why aren't we kind of thinking in the thought process of the military? Why are they not being, judged by their
Judged by their
peers?
peers. Yeah.
Why weren't there like 6 doctors and 6 nurses on that panel to make that decision? Because I am almost 99.9997% sure that had it been a jury of his peers, he would have been convicted of a crime.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you there. And I think, as we wrap this episode up, that one of the things, especially as nurses, and I emphasize nursing because that's what we are, is it's a hard job. It may be hard in different ways depending upon what you do for a living, but the one thing that we need to do is make sure that we're stepping in and helping our fellow coworkers as much as we can, so something like this doesn't happen. Like if I saw you and you're saying I'm about to give somebody 1,000 micrograms of fentanyl, I would be like, pardon me, what?
Well, first of all, I'd be like, whoa, 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 where are you going with that? Because that's just my personality. I'd be like, whoa, 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 whoa. What number do you see on people's patches? Like that should be like a red flag.
And so I think that we need to make sure that we're taking our time and stepping in when we can. And of course, I know we're fighting for safe ratios as a part of this, because that'll give us a better ability to step in and help. Especially with some new nurses. One of the nurses that I had listened to, bless her heart, it was her 6th day in the ICU.
That's a shame.
And so I am just at a point now where I think that it's going to be very important within the nursing community to make sure that we're stepping in and stepping up to help other nurses any way that we can, especially when we see something that may not be right, because it's not about if you make an error, it's going to be a matter of when. And if you can catch it before you make it, that's the best time.
Exactly. And on that note, right now, the judicial system does not have our back. So if we don't have the hospital administrators, facilities do not have our back. So we need to have each other's back, and we need to look out for each other. And I don't mean hide secrets. I mean, bring things to people's attention to make, patient safety a priority, and bring nursing back to what it was. We were heroes. Now we're zeros. We need to go back to being heroes.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you know someone else who would also like this episode, please share it with them. You can find other episodes on your favorite podcast platforms, and be sure to visit our website, thenursingpostpodcast.com, for references on this episode and our merch.